Welcome to the Inner Sense channel. Today I am delighted to be joined again for the third time on this channel by Katherine Peil Kaufmann, and we will be talking again about emotion. I've really enjoyed, since our last discussion, which you can find in the video section on this channel, really enjoyed listening to some of Katherine's presentations, including a recent conference, which many of the people who've inspired me were speaking at, along with Katherine, and this led me to invite Katherine to come back and talk about some of her latest synthesis of the science around emotion, and even some of the things we don't yet understand about organisms and emotion. So, Katherine, welcome.
It's great to see you again, Ian.
So you've been studying emotion and helping people understand the power of emotion as a kind of guidance system for organisms to persist and stay alive for decades now. And your recent talks have really brought together so many different concepts, from basic concepts that have been around in science for many decades, but also some of the emerging fringe ideas which are gaining traction. So maybe if you can start with a broad overview of the science behind emotion, please.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate your use of the word fringe because there are so many different approaches to understanding life, but the mainstream ones are still thinking about the organism as a machine and using computational models. So I've sort of just gone with that recently and followed it to the natural point where the organism has things going on that machines do not and perhaps cannot. So it's great to have such interest in the computational paradigm, because it turns out that the living organism is just this amazingly organized system. And unfortunately, we've been given the impression by both science and religion that the organism is somehow flawed. It's outdated to our animal instincts, or outdated to our ancestral environments, that we have cognitive biases and we don't perceive things accurately, that we're living in a matrix or Maya. You know what? That's just really wrong. We have limited perceptual mechanisms because they give us exactly what we need to participate in the machinery of reality creation. And when I say the machinery, I'm using the modernist, mechanistic, Newton, physicalist interpretation, because I think that's the best way of getting where we need to go right now without falling into fringy weeds. But I'm okay with weeds. I've got a nice machete. But the value that I bring to this as both a scientist and a humanitarian is that this new science is anchored in direct experience. So you don't have to have anything but an organism and know the difference between when you're having a feeling and when you're having a thought, because they're all tangled up together, and our explanations about the body, especially around emotion, are just
so
emotion is associated with original sin. 4 out of the 7 are negative emotions, but the positive emotions are associated with virtue. So what's going on here? And the fact is they actually work together to regulate the self. So the main message that I like to introduce is that you have this incredible guidance system. It's embodied in every living system, although we have the most complex neural structure. So the informational component in the emotional sense is much more complex for us than it is, say, for a bacterium, because all the living system needs to start building a mindscape is a simple experience of something that is either pleasurable or painful, something akin to this feels good, this feels bad. And then once you have that sensory perception, you have motor responses to avoid that which is painful and approach that which is pleasurable. And that simple hedonic system gives rise to all of learning. It gives rise to the inactive mind, if you're familiar with that concept, the 5E mind. But it's really misunderstood. So did you want to interrupt me? Feel free.
Yes, please. Yeah, there's several things I really like there. One is that so you're sort of saying, if I've understood you correctly, that often we hear that there's something wrong with organisms, or in religion we say we're sinning or flawed, but you're proposing, or you're explaining, that organisms are actually far more sophisticated than perhaps we give them credit for.
Yep.
And what I want to sort of ask or suggest is that maybe we're projecting onto our idea of the organisms, the idea of them being limited or flawed, because our understanding is limited, which is what you said. So when a set of vocabulary or a set of symbols that we're trying to use to describe the world or describe ourselves reach their limits, then we may, like, let's say I'm using a mechanistic model or a robotic model to describe a cat or a dog. When that kind of description reaches its limit, I may project the limit onto the dog, but actually the dog hasn't got the limits. It's me, it's my model that's got the limits.
Exactly. That's a beautiful point. And also too, our vocabulary, our culture, everything is so connected to these basic symbolic ideas that it's hard to articulate what needs to be articulated to rediscover the organism. So the model that I've started using that to organize what we think we know is the metaphor of the Tao from Eastern religion. And if you're familiar with that, it's basically a placeholder for the organizing principle of the universe, which has always been considered to be in Taoist tradition. So it's like this, so it's a process view of reality where if you are in, it's very naturalistic because it's the way nature is. And the idea is to ride the wave of nature and to be in balance with nature. So that's what the organism wants us to be able to do. And it gives us emotion to help us figure out how to do that. So there's a beautiful, deep story about physics. The story I first told was about how behavior of bacteria is guided by this particular chemistry. And it all looks like it turns on this simple computation of like a 0-1 feeling of pleasure or pain, which I call the fundamental semantic information bit. So I'm going to kind of use in our conversation today the computational paradigm, because people that are designing intelligent robots right now are running right up against the edge of all the questions that my work has been addressing for a long time, and nobody knows what I'm talking about. So it's great. There are a lot of wonderful people, and there are connections now all the way from my view of emotion as a sense and how we literally experience these processes, the different layers of sensory stimulus, all the way down to quantum mechanics, which is great. And then you find these wonderful links to people like Stephen Wolfram. Are you familiar with his work? Mm-hmm. He believes everything is a computation, that the entire, like our whole modeling systems from language to concepts to mathematics or to logics and then mathematics are all built upon a deeper, more simple level of computation. And he's brilliant, and his stuff is like at the outer limits in some way. But now, since 2019, he's been doing a physics project to connect his computational ideas with physics, and the laws of physics are literally dropping out of what he's doing. So it's wonderful to take that and put it together with our experience of pleasure and pain, and everything kind of falls together in a beautiful way. So, instead of going into, yeah.
Oh, sorry, to pick up on that point, so that Stephen Wolfram is arguing that everything is a kind of computation. So
at the very bottom,
there's he talks about this ruliad, a collection of rules and computational processes. So when I think of the word computation, I think I'm trying to work something out, figure something out, and that can't. So to what I hear you saying about emotion, which it is it's a way for us to ride the changes of life, the change. I can't remember what you said, the wave of the environment or something along those lines. So the valence, which you talk about, whether it's feeling, the strength of whether it feels good, pleasurable or unpleasurable. The computation is the process by which we experience emotion. Is that what you're saying, or is the emotion a computation?
Okay, that's a really good question, and there's a lot of whirling, swirling stuff around this. But the computational, just think about it as the computer. We're using a computer right now. We're all familiar with computers. That's machinery. That's hardware. Okay, but the person using it is an agent, and the person using it is interfacing with software. So if we think about the machinery of the universe being the deterministic physical laws, and that's what I mean by this flow of the Tao, and the flow of the Tao is actually going between the level of quantum physics and the level of classical physics. And there's a creative process there, and we are sitting right in the middle of that, and we are computing self-referential computations and selecting how to literally create ourselves and recreate ourselves in every moment. So that's a deep and wide story, because the self is not just me. At the quantum level, it's a collective. It's a dance of parts and wholes. That's why when you go to the complexity sciences, which I've been steeped in for quite a while, you always have a system that's interacting with an external environment. And that's key to the story here, because you and I, when we're getting about in our world, every time we move, we're in a new relationship. My inner needs and requirements are in a different situation. So I need to respond constantly to the fact that I'm moving around in my environment. And that's key to the story of how we interact, because our interactions in the environment are how, we're eating food, we're supporting our metabolism, we're breathing, which is an even more ancient way of supporting our metabolism. We're doing all of these things to stay alive. It's not just that it's a computer and we're just these lumbering robots. We're participants. So my story is sort of this agent in the machine. But the flow that I'm describing is completely deterministic. It's the physics, but that we sit right at the interface of that, the same way that there's a kernel with information being condensed down into this simple kernel and then decompressed back out in another domain, the same way the Microbiome kernel in the computer works, which is sort of like its mind, its interface with the world. And it's the same way that it's the same way the network system condenses information and then transmits it to a different receiver. So all of that stuff happens at the interface of this. So I call that where the agent is in the machine. So that the part doing the computing, doing this work of literally creating the self, and that's a level that dips into some of the most ancient philosophical questions, like Plato. In the Taoist, there's heaven and there's earth, right? And in Plato's world, there's a Platonic world, and then there's the actual world. Well, when you think about the physics of it, there are two worlds that we're going back and forth between. And a lot of people like Mike Levin are doing these really amazing experiments, finding bioelectric patterns are reaching into some memory system, where is it located? So people are more and more talking about the Platonic realm in an updated way. And that's what I mean when I say in the Tao, what heaven is actually the quantum domain, because that's where you have this ultimate wholeness of one thing that can be many and infinitely many things at the same time. But these are patterns that are part of quantum mechanics. That's how it works. But the fact that there needs to be an observer is huge to the story. And the same reason, we have Gödelian limits to math models is because uncertainty and probability and paradox are all part of the story. And that's what we need to work with when we're deciding information from the real world that we walk around in every day, and then information from this Platonic realm, which is essentially our unconscious. It's everything that the body is doing physically that we don't have to attend to, thank goodness. It's every little cell is interacting in its environment. It's doing what it needs to do. And all I need to do is listen to my feelings as I interact with the environment, to be playing in that same game by those same rules. So this idea of a Platonic realm and capturing what we mean in spirituality by things like Jung's collective unconscious ideas where the soul might live, things like this. And there are people like Federico Frigine that are using pure quantum information as this informational structure that is part of what informs us in any moment about what is not yet self. We have a self and not self relationship with our immediate environment, but we have a self, not yet self relationship with our future. And that the fact that we need to understand time differently, we need to understand space differently, but it's all right there in our experience. So
yeah,
we can move on to that if you want.
Yes, yeah. That's would like to pick up on a few things there you said about the importance of the observer, and then this compression to the most sort of important or simple symbol, which is then used simple symbol. And this reminded me, we had a professor of politics on this channel who also teaches yoga and interoceptive awareness outside of her academic work. And she told me about Manos Toskeris's work on the politics of the emotional side of politics. And one thing they were talking about was an experiment where they looked at the effect of, I think it was flags from different countries on political decision making. So they said that I can't remember the details, I'm probably saying it slightly wrong, but depending on what flags are around a politician at a time will influence how they make decisions. So
absolutely,
this is, we've got the observer there, we've got a very simple symbol, which is a flag, which maybe represents a friendly country or a threatening country, and that will maybe influence it changes the outcome. So
totally,
from the realm of complete possibilities, it narrows the number of outcomes down.
Absolutely. And these are unconscious embodied processes. They've been known as embodied cognition or priming effects. And that was really, really, really hard to get to, because getting away from the behaviorist tradition and into the idea of the mind as a computational sort of thing pulled us out of the body. But then suddenly, well, wait a minute, all of these unconscious priming effects and embodied decision-making, cognitive processes are going on. So again, that's opening up this idea that, the Cartesian idea that all the intelligence is in the brain it's not, absolutely not. It's in every cell of the body. And at the lowest levels, when cellular life was first coming to be, they had to interact with their environment in ways that they could tell the difference between food and poison, just to maintain a metabolism, because life really is a sort of a metabolism first story, and the genes are more of a record. So evolution is much more of a phenotype first story, from how the organism really does, because it interacts with the environment to build a mindscape, to build an inactive mind. And that's always been part of the story that's missing. So there is this yes, no value system of the body. No is mediated by pain. And it's saying no to self-destruction. Okay? You need to have a stable physical form within which to do anything socially or collectively. So that's what negative emotion is doing. But its counterpart, positive emotion, is all about self-development. And so so there are two right and good attractors. The body says yes to both of them. It just says yes a lot louder to the imperative of self-preservation, which is avoiding self-destruction, right? So that's why we have 4 times as many basic painful emotions as we have joy, because all we need, joy feels good and it helps us learn all of the good new things. But the painful feelings tell us what not to do, what not to, what to avoid, what not to, but unfortunately, we use pleasure and pain to punish one another or to bribe and control one another. This actually hijacks our inner guidance system, which is about self-regulation. But from the very bottom, the self is both an autonomous whole in its environment, and it's a collection of parts that's part of greater wholes, from the cells all the way to our communal sense of being. And in terms of politics, we have this sort of separation between emphasizing if the collective it should be more important in Eastern traditions, or if the autonomous agent, individuality is more important, because individuality is about preserving the body. So it's going to be associated with the negative emotions more, but the positive emotions, which is where we're going, which is about development of our personal mindscapes and social landscapes cooperatively. That's where we're really supposed to be. But that this East-West kind of, we need both. The whole Tao story is that we need both, and we have to balance them constantly all the time. That's the idea of being with the Tao, is finding that balance between yin-yang opposites. But one more thing is that politics, we have the right and we have the left, which are exactly that same division. The right wing is all about, it used to be about conservatism, conserving scarce resources, and about preserving, although it's not anymore. It's about conserving ideologies, and limited ones, and limited spheres of who we think we are, and identity narratives. But that it's driven by the negative emotion, which is why somebody like the person that's in our White House right now, I don't even want to say person, that's in our White House right now, it's pushing the buttons of fear, of anger, of righteousness, and even hijacking people's genuine spiritual intentions. So it's very, very powerful. And so what you need to do is understand how those negative and positive emotions are working together. Negative emotions are pushing us away from certain things that are exactly the opposite of what these people are fighting for. And then somebody can get in your OODA loop and control you, and So that's the political story. And what we really need is to understand emotions drive us. They drive our behaviors. And unless we're mindful of the informational component, we are going to be like robots. Somebody can just push those buttons. But the point is, we have developed way beyond the pleasure and pain, but we never figured out what it meant. So we have these complex negative emotions that are like shame and pride that are leveraged into entire spiritual ideas about dying as a martyr and and killing your bride because you're afraid she's not a virgin, or all this. It's horrible. We need to fix it as quickly as possible.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So these, the usefulness of these negative emotions, they've been warped and hijacked, or taken to the extreme. So I can see how something like a religion or a set of societal rules can be beneficial in times of hardship, or when things have grown, a community has grown where it's stressing the resources around it. So you need to create some order and some kind of guiding rules, guiding principles. But then when the compression, that symbol or the bow tie, the kernel which we use to summarize those values, becomes misunderstood or used in the wrong way, then it becomes harmful. And is what you're saying, we need to kind of update our understanding, refresh our view of how all of this works. And
what we need is
what
we need is a new axial age. And that's why I'm really happy to be hanging out more with philosophers than just scientists. As much as I love scientists, and I am a scientist, the philosophers are going the places that the scientists need to go to re-examine their metaphysics. And they're the keepers of value. Axiology is a study of what's right and wrong, what's good and bad. And originally, when we were evolving as a species, there was this beautiful point in time called the Axial Age, where there was the emergence of Buddhism and Taoism and Christianity, the Abrahamic traditions. And it was all because we were ready to come to some idea of a common good. Because if everyone has a similar goal, then you're going to be able to cooperate in these collectives. But if you're in conflict constantly with different goals, you're never going to join into these ever higher collectives, which is what nature does, which is what the cosmos does. So each one of these was a way of giving people a metaphysical framework to look at the world and agree that this is going to work. And to the degree that they actually work with what our body is doing, they will last. And at that moment, the monotheistic traditions, the Abraham traditions that led to Christianity and Judaism and Islam, were all about having a singular God. Because if there's one God, then there's one good. And it really is all about a common value system. And what we need is a new axial age, because that happened 2,000 years ago. And we've kind of gone off track in terms of having a common understanding of what is good. And so, particularly since science, which came in as opposed to religion, because religion was really getting a little too carried away with the using shame and pain and punishment and bribes. And, you pay me for the Catholic Church and all of that, what are they called, indulgences. You can buy your way out of hell and things like that. And then, of course, there was a big revolt against that, because we need our freedom. The reason we have those 4 basic emotions is all about these foundational needs. One of the most important ones is the need for autonomy within community. But if you don't have autonomy first, you can't be in community. So the whole idea of justice comes from anger. But if you don't understand that anger is talking about genuine empowerment and equitable empowerment, which is what the organism offers all of us, and that we have to have structures that work with that, we're going to keep fighting and pushing back until we get those structures in place. And sadness is about loss of energy from the system. It's about loss of opportunities in the environment. It's about loss of friendship, loss of connection. Disgust is all about poison instead of food. It's all about not eating stuff. We're not letting bacterial overgrowth grow and things like that. But it's been leveraged into disgust against one another and hatred. So
if I could just interject there about some of those relationships between emotion and resources and energy, and it's reminding me of some of the work on mental health, trying to understand mental health from a kind of metabolic point of view or inflammation in the body. So if we have metabolic dysfunction, maybe mitochondria aren't generating energy in an optimal way, then you will feel depressed, which is a sad form of, as you said, sadness.
Exactly. You've been listening to Nick Lane, haven't you?
To Nick Lane and others, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's the whole point. These ancient systems, I mean, mitochondria that we have now as our principal powerhouses were individual on their own. They invented metabolism before we did. They invented this, and they're commensal with us, and all of that's still going on. So they are part of me doing regulation at their level that I don't have to allocate any of my attention to. All I need to do is feel the coarse graining that's coming all the way up through my bioelectricity, my chemistry, all of these. And all it is this beautiful little simple difference between what feels good and what feels bad. Then when you start realizing that, oh, there's 4 different things that feel bad. There's sadness, there's fear, there's disgust, there's anger. And yet and there's one joy thing, because that feels good. And it sort of is such a reward in and of itself. It builds on itself. But we need to understand those 4 negative emotions and reduce the things in our environment that are in the way of us satisfying those basic needs for our own autonomy, our own agency. And then and only then can we really cooperate in these resonant relationships with one another, because people do mess up. People take advantage, people bribe, people threaten, people violate, people kill. So you have to have yourself in place first. And that's why we're all messed up about selfish genes and selfishness in religion and all that. No. The self is the center of physics. It is the reference frame that's referred to by the coordinate systems in general relativity. No one's quite really made that connection, because subjectivity isn't something science can talk about. There's a taboo about it.
I'd like to quiz you more on self in a moment. What's coming to mind is what I find really promising and encouraging about all of the interest in the microbiome and this. So I'll wind back a little bit. Many years ago, I went to a talk by an evolutionary biologist called Elizabeth Sartoris, who says that actually, the view that nature is red in tooth and claw and based on competition is not right. You see, in nature, we see these more like a spiral dynamic of there may be periods of competition, but then we see cooperation. And as you're aware, mitochondria, it's believed that once were a bit like a archaic bacteria, but now they cooperate with us. We give them a home, and they generate energy. We gather food from. We walk around and gather lots of food, and they liberate the energy for us. And then with this new understanding of the microbiome and the boundary where we draw that kind of Markov blanket between ourselves and the environment, the microbes which are in our gut are influencing how we feel through the chemicals that they produce. But then, the microbes in the soil where my carrots grow will influence the carrot and influence me. So where do I end, and where does the other begin? So yes, what's your views on self then?
Well, that's a very key issue, because one of the biggest mistakes we have made is this idea of us against them. And whenever we're in that state of mind or behaving in that way or believing in that way, it's actually it's an inner conflict between us. It's a conflict between our autonomy and our collective nature. And that dual identity goes all the way down, all the way down. The network story is this dance of parts and wholes, and how the whole is the organism interacting with its local external environment. So everything I'm saying has this understanding that there's some sort of a boundary, a distinction being made between inside and outside, between up and down, between all of the, and that's fundamental to the machinery of the universe that I'm talking about. So that's why I've gone to the laws of form and this idea of self-distinctioning, because what is a form? How can we talk about information? How can we talk about a self without understanding what form is? So there is, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds here, but it's a beautiful way of thinking about how something is demarked from the nothingness, how an object is within a framework, that subjective framework, that relative framework that I told you about, whether it's an electron or a human being, and that its behavior, its relative perceptions are going to change by its motion and its momentum. And that's the story that goes all the way down. But there's also entanglement, which we don't quite understand, but is absolutely central to everything that happens in the physical realm in terms of the wholes and the parts. And so it all comes down to connectivity. And there's this beautiful story, both from relational and transactional interpretations of quantum mechanics, where there's like this handshake between particles. But the way I see it is there's two streams of information. There's one, and it all happens in the moment of now, where the stream of information from our res extensa, from Plato's the ordinary world that we live in, that's a line of information that's been generated by us. And then there's a line of a line of information that's been generated in the future, if you will. But because there's an aspect of us that is still the whole. And so you have this down to parts and wholes. It's two information streams that come together in a fundamental comparison between self, and not yet self. And there's this really great story there about the NAND-gate, the not and gate, which is a new universal circuit that can make every other Boolean circuit. And that fundamental comparison is an act of self-reference, where at the very, very kernel, you're referencing the self, you're referencing the not yet self against the self that just happened, and you're making a choice to recreate exactly the self you want in that moment. So, I mean, that's the way, way, way bottom story. But what that means is that from your perspective, your positive emotions are always asking you to stay cooperative, to stay connected, to love, to resonate, to cooperate. The whole story about red and tooth and claw, the paper that I wrote in 2014 said, no, nature is green with grace and embrace. And that whole red and tooth and claw is only because of looking at what the negative emotions are doing to help us preserve ourselves and the food chain. And the food chain is just a given. It's part of nature, and it always will be. But it makes us realize that all living systems have every right to regulate themselves. And just because we're interconnected, then that, you want to consume energy, you want to consume food, you want to consume at a minimal level, because you're giving respect to everything else that upon which your life is afforded, the ecosystem, for example. So there's a deep ecological green ethic that comes out of this too. So
a philosophical question, or an even more philosophical question, I should say. So when I look at society in 2025, there are lots of things that are maybe worrying, but there's also a sense that we are moving towards something more cooperative. The majority of people are moving something. Equality and diversity training shows that there's an openness to different forms. Animal rights ethics for animals is changed dramatically. Even an appreciation of the intelligence of plants and fungal networks and so on. So if that, the food chain and the hierarchy, one person I spoke to floated this idea that we're evolving towards becoming breatharians, and then I said, okay, well, if we all live on prana, how do we know that there's a limitless source of prana, and what's outside? Is there a boundary to that? So I guess what I'm asking is, do you think we're evolving to becoming more compassionate, and will we aim to reduce the suffering of all species, or is there a higher order perspective that we can't understand, that where what appears to be suffering on the planet of maybe a tree when we cut it down may not really be suffering in the greater scheme of things?
Well, I would like to say that both of those things are true, but because when you look at the very, very, very big picture of one identity, if you will, experiencing itself in as many different localized experiences of living systems as possible. That's a different way of thinking about it. But that the fact that we're partially creative agents in the machine. So we have that creativity, and we need to learn the guidance that we have. It's our free will isn't supposed to even exist in terms of science, and yet we experience it and we use it, and like we're held accountable to it. All of our, it's ridiculous. So let's just stop and really just ground ourselves in our science and our way of thinking about life back in our experience, which is what I'm doing here. And the embodiment really does have capacities we don't understand yet. And I'm not a breatharian yet myself. However, I do know that the breath is the foundational source of metabolic nourishment. Beyond, well, first it was light with photons, and then the emergence of, the breath is connected with the gravity, and our experience of heat is connected with gravity as well through thermodynamics. If you start really digging into some of these physics programs and all of we perceive these things because they are part of how our body is regulating and maintaining and being autopoietic in ways we don't have to think about. I mean, I would go crazy if I had to tell my liver what to do, or if I had to tell my fingernail how to grow properly after I've cut the end of my finger off with a knife or something. I don't have to worry about any of that. I can be an idiot. But I have to have the integrity of understanding what my feelings are telling me, and the difference between regular flow of thought, which is a beautiful thing. Thoughts lead to other thoughts and all of this, but the feeling is a deeper river. And if you can separate those two things, and you realize whenever there's a feeling involved, there's self-relevance. Something about your identity is changing, and you need to either stop it from changing in a bad way, or you need to facilitate it in changing in a developmental way, and in a way that's actually actualizing more and more and more of whatever your potential might be. So that's the real creative engine, is all about self-development. That's why it feels good to be in relationship, and it feels bad to lose relationships with grief and all of that. But you can't be in a relationship where you're being victimized or dominated, or that's why boundaries are so important. You have Buddhist detachment, where you have to detach from everything, and it's the cravings and aversions, which, by the way, are hedonic valence, that cause all suffering. And that's only true because we're not really doing what they're asking us to do. Now, they're close with transcending the self, or transcending the ego, but the self is central to everything. It's central to the self, not self distinction of the immune system. It's central to the distinction between a stem cell that becomes a liver cell versus a brain cell. The identity is absolutely central all throughout every nested layer of the organism. And so we need to put the self back in there. And in terms of anchoring this in experience, there are practices that have been around forever, such as yoga and breathing, to really that's the one thing we can do to change, to alter the states of our consciousness. And that's why mindfulness training for relaxation, and there's the stress response, which is exactly what our pain chemistry is telling us. It's the internal reflection of our experience of pain and a threat to the stability of the body. And you see the entire, inflammation and all of the different chronic diseases, from cancer to, obesity, that are connected with the emotional system as well. So it's this, placebo effects, nocebo effects. It's all throughout our regulatory dynamics. And our level of it is to use our mind and build our mind and refine our mind and farm those universal best ways of doing things, because we are talking about health as the health of the body, goodness as the health of the body, rightness as balance within the body. So that's the value system, and it's universal to all living systems, not just humans, but like the squirrel outside has every right to regulate itself.
So, thank you for. So,
in terms of suffering, pain and a quick death isn't suffering. Suffering is when your natural autonomy and your creative capacities are frustrated. That's what suffering is. And the complex negative emotions that we think of as normal, like shame and hate and rage and jealousy, and they're cultural extensions of these 5 basic emotions that we haven't solved the conditions. So ultimately, if we're really using the information in our emotions, we should feel a predominance of a building of complex positive emotions, like love and
compassion,
admiration, and gratitude, all of those things. The positive psychology community had their thumb on the pulse of this, but what they were lacking was how the negative emotions work together. They kind of wanted to not think about those, but they work together toward the same exact goal of preservation of the form, so that you can use the mind to create ever more complexity in your individual mindscape and your social landscape, all the way to the global village. So I'm optimistic. I mean, my head would have exploded years ago if I didn't have faith in the organism, its resilience, and our ability to finally get it and be honest about how we're feeling. So, and the world has come a long way since I first had these ideas, and in the early 90s, So I think that we need to make a real clear distinction between pain and suffering. Suffering is long term, and most of our suffering is man-made, because we have built domination and punishment and bribery, but mostly punishment, into our ways of regulating one another, and missing the entire story of how nature regulates through the self. It's distributed control, distributed freedom, distributed creativity throughout the entire ecosystem, throughout the entire biosphere. So it's a different way of thinking, and I like to think of it as natural spirituality, because it provides an overarching story, because it's the story of the embodiment. It's what, if there is a God, that's what he gave us. That's what she gave us, whatever. If it's evolution, that's what we have. And there's not flawed. It's absolutely amazing. We just didn't know how deep and important the life is, the agent is, to the machinery of reality creation itself. And with that comes huge responsibilities, but huge freedom as well. So I am an optimist, but we're definitely going in the wrong way in American politics, that's for sure.
I really appreciate how you can hold so many different, I said this at the beginning of our conversation, hold so many different concepts and tie them together. That last bit you were talking about learning from nature, this whole, I don't know if you've come across Janine Benyus and biomimicry and the incredible work that she's doing. But yeah, I feel very I feel the same as you, that we've got so much to learn about how things are in the natural world, and not to limit ourselves with how we think we must control the world through our imagined order of economy and society.
Superiority. Yeah.
Superiority.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of that
So
comes from our Western religious traditions, the doctrine of domination, where we dominate all the animals in the world and we dominate one another. And that's just such a mistake.
so so thank you, Catherine. I'm aware, well, we both have things to be getting on with. It's mid-morning, mid-morning where you are, and it's early evening where I am. So thanks once again for joining us, and I hope there's a part 4 sometime down the line.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your interest in new ways of thinking about life, and especially your emphasis on understanding the inner wisdom of the body, and what kind of sensory capacities we're actually embodied in. Because they're never going to be able to build certain things into robots. I mean, they're wonderful tools that can process parallel and all this, but they don't feel, and we do.
Yeah, and we don't know the things that we're sensing, the full range of things that we're picking up and sensing yet, because we're still discovering the things that the sensors and the receptors that our body has. So I'd just like to remind people listening to subscribe to the Inner Sense channel to find more information about inner body awareness, closely linked to emotion, and more tips on how to improve their well-being.